Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session on designing for human-centric retail. My name is Andrew Smith. I'm your host. I'm from Think Uncommon. We're seeing such an incredible amount of change across retail right now. Stores are evolving fast, frontline roles are under pressure, and digital transformation is everywhere. But amid all of this tech change, it's never been more important to keep people at the center of everything that we do, whether that's customers walking the aisles or associates walking the floor. So today, I'm excited to dive into this with Jessica Grisolia, Retail Industry Solutions Lead at Scandit. We're both nerds around keeping humans at the center of everything we do, so it's going to be a very fun chat today. I'm looking forward to getting my nerd hat on. Jessica is incredibly passionate about reimagining how technology truly serves people, a topic that, as everyone knows, I'm also obsessed with and rant about regularly. So, Jessica, I'm super excited to chat with you today. I'll let you introduce yourself to our crew.
Thank you, Andrew. And it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Jessica Grisolia, as Andrew mentioned, and I am a retail nerd with a long experience, over 10 years, in product management and industry solution with a focus on retail, where at Scandit, I really work with global retailers to solve the technology problems that cause headaches, not too infrequently, I would say. So in my role, I focus on new technology, especially in the realm of smart data capture, and how looking at processes, associates, and consumer, we can help them make better experiences overall.
I love that. And especially the concept of there is so much data in retail that isn't captured because it's difficult to do it. It's, capturing those real world insights and bringing to the life is incredibly valuable, though, when you can nail it. I have always found that within retail in particular, we haven't really landed on what human-centric retailing really is in terms of how we define it. What do you use when, what are the words that you string together to try and define human-centric retail when you're talking with partners?
Yeah, so Andrew, it's a great first intro question. And I would say, especially with how technology in the realm of AI has been fueling the concept of automation and full automation in not only in retail, but in several other industries in the past few years, we are often redefining where the human, and especially the associate in these regards, plays a pivotal role. And what I often notice is that there's still like a lot of question marks on which processes, which technologies are we going to replace associates with robots, or how is the future going to look like? And to me, I'm very passionate about the fact that, especially the retailers I work with, they're convinced and they're certain that the human aspect is what makes retail authentic. It's what builds the experiences in stores, creates the loyalty, and brings customer back over and over. So with that concept clarified, to me, then the question is about how do we use technology to empower the associates. And probably many people don't know about Scandit, so I'll here introduce what the company does. We're a smart data capture company, and what it means is that we use real-time data capture that can come from capturing barcodes or IDs or text or objects, and we provide then this information in a way that empowers the associates and the customers in retail, but also beyond retail, to then take meaningful decisions out of that. And to me, that's what human-centric retail means. It means that any type of technology that I use to empower my associate helps them do something concrete, take a decision, or avoid a mistake, for instance. So that's what that means to me. What about you, Andrew? Do you have a definition?
I always have opinions, Jessica. You know that. No, I think you've described that incredibly beautifully. Like this concept of, how do you put your own biases aside, your own opinions of what you think you want to achieve, and actually just focus on the behaviors of the people that you're trying to influence those behaviors of, and work closely with them to understand it more. So actually deeply thinking about it. One of my biggest frustrations is people sitting there, we're going to get 50% digital transactions by 20 whatever. It's like, well, do your customers want that? Is that actually a good idea for your business, or do you just think it is because it's going to cut costs? It's like we go through this weird force field that makes us forget that we're humans when we go into the office, and we like just start ignoring people's behaviors. It drives me bonkers.
And I was thinking about a concrete example of how, some questions that we try to solve with retailers, they seem trivial when you hear them, and then they create multi-million-dollar problems. No, so for instance, like we were working with a quick commerce company in the USA, and around Thanksgiving, they have always the same problem. There is a surge in online orders, and especially turkeys. So they need to pick a specific size of bird that accomplish the oven size. So if I'm having a specific amount of guests at home, or if my oven doesn't fit, I don't know, a 20 plus pound turkey, I need to make sure that what I order is exactly what I get. And in a already very frenetic job there is picking for online in-store fulfillment, what the pickers were struggling with is that this is information that normally is not encoded in the barcode. So you don't just scan the label and get the combination of price and weight. So they had to manually input the weight and the price, and mistakes were quite recurring. And so, like, your turkey would end up being either too big or too small. So people would leave still hungry, or even worse, they would put the wrong decimal. So it was like 100 pounds turkey, and it
Wow.
would end up costing like thousands. So you can imagine that this was affecting the customer like directly. And that's what I mean with sometimes like technology in human-centric retail is, why would we ask our associate and our pickers, already super stressed about their pick rate, to now input manual data if you can capture the full label? It doesn't have to be a technology that completely disrupt your stores and require changes in layout and whatsoever. It can be something that uses the technology that the employees already have. So yeah, I could go on a rant on this, but this for me a very concrete example on technology can be incremental. It doesn't need to be all flashy.
I didn't have talking about turkeys and Thanksgiving on my bingo card for today's webinar, but here we are. I think that story's rad for lots of reasons. Thanksgiving's a new holiday to me, so I now know anyway the stress around this concept of making sure your turkey's right. Otherwise, the neighbors are going to talk about you. I remember a similar story of British Airways. The CEO was told by one of the first class flight attendants that what's something that's annoying all of the passengers, and I'll just offhand just made a quick comment about, well, you know what, no one likes the olives, everyone's picking the olives out of the salad. Just thinking they were making a joke, all of a sudden the CEO's just saved $1 million a year by taking the olives out of the salad. And it's amazing what happens when you connect with your frontline. Why is it, in your mind, thinking of these examples, why is it hard to get the store associate and the customer kind of brought into digital transformation conversations? Why don't more retailers do it kind of naturally, do you think?
So, Andrew, I think one reason is a word that you just mentioned where you were explaining a successful example, which is listening. I think oftentimes, as working in IT and product teams, if I think about the store technologies teams and so on and so forth, we get tasked by businesses with achieving a certain objective, no, and then we still too often look at retrofitting technology into accomplishing a specific objective. And that's where different type of feedback from your frontline may disrupt your project. So that's something that comes back consistently in what I observe of successful projects, where the user, especially when it's the associate, it's at the core of the objective that we're trying to solve. Like, are we looking at increasing tenure, decreasing onboarding time? Are we looking at increasing the employee satisfaction, for instance? So then I see that if that's the objective and technology gets aligned with that objective, it's a much more successful result. The other way around, where I'm trying, for instance, to retrofit a technology into an environment, and the recipient, who's in this case the associate, is responsible for saying, oh yes, I like this change very much, despite the fact that I'm now asked to do 3 more clicks or open 5 more apps and reconciliate different systems, that's where there may be resistance into really including the workforce in the project.
Yeah, there's been so many conversations that I've had where the value of having a person from the frontline in the meeting, especially when you're in a design session, has just unlocked incredible value. To your point, but I'm already inputting that address in this other thing. Why do I need to do it again? Oh, actually,
Exactly.
you don't need to do it again. We could be pulling it from there. And it's something that we get so enthralled and obsessed with what we're trying to deliver that, as a central support person on a project, we get so enthralled by it that we start ignoring it. We put the blinkers on and we ignore everything else around us, and how, what parallel problems we could be solving, or how can we make our solution better by understanding the parallel context of the solution.
And Andrew, on exactly this example, a couple of years ago, we were working with another USA retailer, and they had the flagship store in Soho. So after the launch of yet another app for their associates, we visited together the store, and he was the product owner, and asked the store manager how they liked the new technology. He didn't specify which one it was. It didn't specify it was the new app. And the store manager didn't get that he was from headquarters. So she replied, "Oh, it's terrible, man. The technology is terrible here." And you should have seen his face. It was like a very comic reaction. And what this boiled down to was that app was designed flawlessly. It was perfect. It was beautiful, and it was beautiful to use. The reason why the store manager was saying that the technology was terrible is because they were having this application that was providing product information and their CRM that was providing also product information. The two systems didn't match, and the information was not the same. So for them, of course, technology was terrible because they had to check two systems. And if they saw that the information was not the same, they had to try to understand, okay, what am I going to say to my customers? Because now they're coming to pick up the order that the CRM told them by email was ready, but that my team is still assembling downstairs. So that's to me a very strong example of not only you need to have your frontline workers in the process, but you also need to make sure that you don't just look at that specific process, but the whole architecture behind it, because you may not be thinking about important puzzle pieces that your store managers or your store associate know about because they work across all the technologies that you provide them. Because if you miss that holistic view and that holistic experience, well, you may as well have developed now a perfect application, and the overall feeling is still that technology is not right. So,
I mean, the user's always right.
the user is always right.
Yeah. Also, though, that story highlights to me how important testing is.
Oh yeah.
And how bad we generally are at it. Like we kind of do our internal testings to make sure that the bits work, but we don't put it into a real life context and try and understand what's actually going to happen when we put it out. And instead we just send out the email, say, "Hey everyone, we've got this new app, use it, it's beautiful." And then all of a sudden, you've got stores everywhere losing productivity because they've got to assess the difference between two systems. Drives me nuts. Testing people, make sure everything's tested in a real world context. We've talked a bit about the mistakes that you can, the traps you can fall into. What about those who are doing a really good job with this? There's lots of retailers that you and I both know that are very good at this kind of stuff, about thinking about the associate and empowering them in a way that is future focused, and tech driven, but always with the associate in hand. Who do you go to? Who do you talk about when you think about the people who are doing it well?
Well, Andrew, I have to mention that we recently announced our partnership with Walmart. So we're empowering their 1.3 million associates with smart data capture. So I think for me, since Walmart is such a people-led company and a tech-powered company at the same time, to me, that's a beautiful example of doing technology right for your associates. So at some point, they were relooking several different processes, including their in-store fulfillment, their product information and lookup and out of stock detection, replenishment, a variety of different processes, because we always ask associates not to wear only one hat, but multiple. And they were redesigning their My Walmart app and really started by the experience that they wanted their associate to have. That's to me a very powerful example, because then the objective was not certain, objective that was detached from reality. It was, how can we make our worker smarter, faster, and more efficient? And then based on each workflow, they had some ideas in mind on how to reach that target. And that's why ultimately it was about like making their day-to-day easier. Because one thing that is for sure across all retailers of any size true is our associate needs to accomplish so much in the day, and how we make sure the technology works for them and makes their onboarding easier. We have such a tenure going down in the past years across a lot of different geographies. So how do we accomplish making them more comfortable in their onboarding? How do we accomplish giving information that is for everyone transparent and not only for associates that have been there for the last 10 years? So this is to me a very powerful example of you can actually, if you have a people first mind, then have a technology power accomplishment.
Fantastic example of a brand that does do this very well. I don't want to walk past, by the way, Walmart are incredibly thoughtful about choosing who they partner with. So congratulations, because I know
Thanks.
that means an awful lot for them to say yes. But like that, them as a brand, they just do such an incredible job of really deeply thinking about the associate experience. And you kind of have to now, right? Because you've got retail everywhere is firmly understanding the importance of physical retail. It's evolving, of course, and it needs to continue to evolve based on what customers want it to be. But there is a war for talent that we have to get the best possible people on the shop floor. When 80% of sales still occur in a store physically, and 90-odd% of transactions, regardless of where they are, use a store in some way, you've got to be thinking about your store associates and the store colleagues and how to give them exactly what they need to do well. Thinking of them like historically, thinking of a store associate, you've mentioned too many apps and too many tools and things like that. What else do you see as being kind of the day-to-day pain points for an associate, particularly as retailers are trying to digitize and think through working smarter and capturing more data? What are the pain points that associates face that as a retailer I should lean into and think about when I'm designing my projects?
That's a great question. I would still stay on that too many. It's too much of everything sometimes for the associates. And as you said, I mentioned before, it's too many tools, it's too many apps, it's too many systems to navigate, and it's too many tasks that we ask them to perform. So, like, if we look at the holistic problem that an associate needs to face on a day-to-day basis, then to me the conclusion is that the main pain point is how to prioritize.
Mm.
How do we, across all the equipment that we provide them in a given day, how do we help them prioritize what is the best course of action to take, what actions to do first, and what are the things that may not get done during the day, and that's still okay. You're still doing a great job. So an example of it is like we have a product, it's called Shelf Use, that's shelf intelligence. So we have a variety of ways to capture the state of the shelf, and then we focus on out of stock. And when we were still building this technology, we went into like an outcome that on paper is great. And it was like the amount of alerts that we would generate. We would generate hundreds of alerts per day. And then the feedback we immediately got from the associates was like, yeah, and you now are giving me 300 alerts, and what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to get on skates and go in the back room, or like how am I gonna address this? And that for us was a very important learning that then we baked in the conception of this product, which was, well, if ultimately we want to make sure that the shelf intelligence is correct and meaningful, then we also have to prioritize the alerts. And then we're going to link them to, for instance, the balance on hand. So if you have a low stock or a gap on the shelf, and then you prioritize for the associate replenishment with something that you have on stock, well, I may have saved now several trips going in the back room and discovering that what I wanted to pick for replenishment is not there. Or you may prioritize the best-selling items instead of the ones that may make the shelf prettier, but then don't make a difference. So that's where we, for instance, like a great example to me on your original question is, well, helping them prioritize what to do, how to do it, how to make that decision with confidence. That's, to me, the pain point that we need to solve. Now, going for the question for you, Andrew, do you have a different pain point that you see associates try to solve for?
Yeah, and most of mine exist around how do you maximize the performance of the store people. Like, at the end of the day,
Oh, yeah.
like, technology being deployed for technology's sake, I think, is always, generally speaking, a mistake. And I see too many retailers who go to somewhere like CES or go to somewhere like NRF's big show and hit the expo floor up and go visit booths like Scandit, which are always fun and always interesting and it's good to learn. But then we kind of create this laundry list of things that we think we'd like. And then we go and kind of just shove them down the throats of store teams when the store teams' problems potentially are something completely different. So I know that there are store colleagues out there who are generally struggling with keeping rosters filled, with motivating employees to hang around and stay with the brand, to build an engagement with my team and to build a culture within my team. And it's hard to do that when you've just got constant change, just being bombarded
Yeah.
with it from central support, from corporate, from the customer, from the global context, from supply chain, from all of those things. It is a really noisy job right now.
Yeah.
Being a store leader, and I would love for brands to think differently around how they can take that into account when they're making decisions about store teams. And store technology deployments. That would be my answer. Is it's busy. So how do you quieten the noise? Well, I think it's probably about time we put the audience to work. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Great idea.
We would love to hear from you. We've rambled on about what we think are the biggest barriers to empowering our store teams with technology. We would love you to use the voting buttons if you see them, or by just placing your answer in the chat to the question of what is the biggest barrier to empowering associates with technology for you. Our friends at Rethink will share the results in the chat shortly as well. So is it budget? Is it capital or operating expense challenges that stops you from being able to empower associates with tech? Is it legacy systems? We've all seen the spaghetti maps that exist in enterprise architecture and retail businesses. So is that holding you back? Is it bandwidth of your technology teams? Are they just unable to keep up with the demands of what the modern retailing needs? Training tools, these things are often, require training, require new systems learning and, cognitive load. And without the right training tools, that becomes difficult. Or is it simply just not a priority? You're focused on some of the other problems that we've been talking about. So let us know what you think, because I would love to hear more about it. You've seen this, or, you engage with retailers, you have to think through and see what else they're doing to empower frontline team members. Like, what happens? If I'm doing this properly as a retailer and genuinely enabling my associates to be better at their job and more empowered and more knowledgeable, what do I get as a result of that other than tenure? We've talked about tenure a lot, but I imagine there's more results that you get to see as well. What have you found?
So, Andrew, it's telling us a question, because I would go for the opposite of tenure as well, So on one side, you may increase the tenure, and on the other side, there are certain realities in which you also need to accept that retail is a job that many associates, especially the one that are a little bit younger, will only do for a very specific amount of time before going to college or maybe taking another role. So I'm thinking now about the example of Staples Canada. We were working with them because with a variable tenure of the employees, they still needed to get some of the key workflows to the T. So what they were were doing, for instance, is they had a pricing and promotion workflow where associate, and that was considered like a more complex workflow, associate had to go with their legacy device and check each price tags and then scan, look at the screen, interpret what that screen was telling them to do. Is it the right price? Is it not the right price? And so on. And do this tirelessly for a certain amount of items. And the problem was that not only this was like an error-prone type of task, but if me or you, Andrew, were doing the grocery and ask, oh, where can I find the pens? And you distract the associate, there's no way that they would remember, oh, I was on this specific SKU. And then what they do, they start over. And so, for instance, one of the outcome of processes that really look at the workflow, so for me, it's always important to look at the whole workflow, no? Was that they went, in this case, Staples went from a 3-step process to a 1-step process where they were scanning the item, and with a mix of optical character recognition and barcode scanning, we were already fetching the information from the catalog price, and it's green is good. It's red is not good. So you're just doing this and we track the information. So if someone distracts you and you hover on the same price, you see that you already scanned it. You see that you already got this information, that you have your dashboard, your finalized plan on how you're going to batch print or change the price. So what in that case, in terms of outcome, to go back to your question, was not only simplifying the process, which in and of itself could be an outcome, but it's not that meaningful. But it was for them, first of all, reducing the total cost of ownership. They reduced the cost of hardware of 45%. And they could do it because they assembled then all the technology on one device. And secondly, they wanted to scale up the amount of tags or price tags that they were checking per week. And they could achieve 100% of compliancy because it's extremely important the prices are correct. Otherwise, they could incur in fines, or it creates a lot of dissatisfaction if you then go at the cashier and see that your price is 10% higher than what you saw. So I think like compliance is often an objective that is extremely important, is about accuracy of the information and of the action. So that to me is a very important example of how, if you look holistically, you redo your workflow, then you can accomplish like not only higher tenure, but sometimes also the opposite. It's like streamline a complex task becomes something that even from day one you can approach.
I think that's such a great example of the stupid stuff we ask our store teams to do all the time. I always tell clients that the greatest lesson I learned when I was leading retail businesses and leading retail operations was go and talk to your frontline teams because they know the dumb things you're doing. And maybe that you haven't given them a voice to share it. Maybe to everyone who goes out to stores, it looks like a small thing, but actually to the store teams, it means a lot. And, that experience you just shared, gosh, I remember stock takes and how terrible they are and how, you're basically sitting in a back room all night counting stuff, how quickly that's been automated and improved through technologies like yours. Like, it's just such an incredible unlock for store teams to take a genuinely frustrating and boring task and make it simpler and easier. Like what that can do for engagement, incredible. Obviously compliance, obviously accuracy of pricing and all that stuff's important, but jeepers, I feel good for the store associate that doesn't have to do that anymore. I want you to keep your eyes out of the chat for a second because I know that the results are coming in. I want an unbiased answer from this one from you, Jessica. But we asked the audience, what they think the biggest blockers are to scaling human-centric innovation and empowering us store associates. You have the privilege of talking to a bunch of retailers and trying to bring a human-centric approach to technology and thinking about the store associate. What do you see as the biggest blockers to brands scaling that thinking, that concept of human-centric innovation?
But I think it's a blend because we often are talking about prioritization for the associate. No, it's complex for them to decide what they are going to prioritize. To me, the second part on scalability is also on the IT teams, that there's no technology that pops up in a vacuum and it's magically deployed. So often what I see being a question mark for the retailer is among all the projects that I can accomplish with my IT budgets. Not only what is going to bring me the ROI, but also, and maybe most importantly, what can I tackle with the resources that I have? And oftentimes when we look up proof of concept with retailer is that blend between, can I start with maybe a low code solution? Can I start with a way of approaching the problem that is deployable in maybe a week, maybe it's even a no code solution so my associates can try it, then they can have a return immediately. And at the same time, and that's a particular pain point that especially retailers in this case have. They have already a lot of technology deployed. No, you may have some legacy systems, both on hardware and software, and you may have some stores with a set amount of cameras already installed. And then at the same time, if you think about what the associates are doing, then you have all these workflows that you already have in place. So to me, it's how do you take all the technology that you already have and you create a connection between them. And in these regards, for instance, we were working with luxury retailers in Europe, and they are very active in fashion, so luxury fashion. And what they were doing is they already had RFID in the back room. So they had very expensive items, of course, but they had so many exceptions. So they were receiving, let's say, 10 boxes of items per day. It's just an example. And some items had RFID tags. Some other items like the jewelry, the perfume did not. And then they had some shipment that were unexpected. Maybe there was a store that was shipping something and that was not catched in the manifest that they had. So to me, that it's a telling example because then the associate, when they were receiving in the morning, they were performing the process with the RFID gun and they had no way to manage the exception. And that's why I say it's important to connect technology. We, in this case, helped these particular luxury retailers being able to manage all the exceptions on the manifest with AR. So we had overlays with augmented reality, and you could see, oh, okay, this is what the RFID gun catched. It was in the manifest, check mark, nothing to do. And then if something was missing from the manifest, it was like, oh, surprise, you have now this very expensive bag that arrived. You could see that this is something that needed to be manually added. You tap on it and it's added. You can see that some items didn't have the RFID tag. So now I have an overlay that tells me, oh, here you need to take the action. You need to open the box and actually scan everything. So it's automatically added to the manifest. So to me, oftentimes the problem with scale and scalability is how do you connect the dots? Because if you have siloed technologies and every technology is very good at doing something very, very specific, then you're still not accomplishing the full potential of the workflow. And that's what I especially try to help retailers with, like seeing how those points are connected, put the story together, and then unlocking the final outcome. Do you have a different take on scalability? Anything else that you've seen hindering?
Well, no, I think you've done a great job of articulating the problem, but also, the poor store associate who is just getting, to your point earlier, too many tools, too many apps, too many things to do, and and we have to become detectives to then solve a problem instead of just getting on with the job that we're there to do, which is serve customers and sell stuff. So I think that's great. But for me, I'm going to go with more like the internal side of things. Like if I think about the culture of innovation in a retailer, and how to kind of unlock human-centric innovation is to start, how often do you fall in love with evidence instead of falling in love with ideas? That's the number one question that I like to pose is that, how often are people talking about evidence? How often are they talking about the fact that they've seen the behavior and they've recorded how our idea is going to change that behavior? And they use evidence to back it up instead of just kind of having the pretty shiny thing in a PowerPoint. Anyone can make anything look good in a PowerPoint. That's why PowerPoint exists, and that's why businesses keep using it, even though it's drives us all bonkers. What I find unlocks that true human-centric innovation comes from this idea that people fall in love with evidence, not ideas. They present data, they present customer voice, they present colleague voice. All of those things come out in the way they talk about their work, rather than it being about the thing itself. If you're in a meeting about a piece of technology and very, very small part of the conversation is about the technology and its capabilities, and instead is about how it's going to change colleague and customer experience, then you're doing it right. You're going to enable that culture of innovation. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah.
One thing I kind of ranted on a little bit before about how we group humans stupidly. We kind of go, this is customer type A, and they have this same choice model and this same behavioral model all the time, and it's stupid because it's not how humans work. That level of diversity in the customer base also happens in store teams. I grew up in telco retail where we had between 10 and 3 you would have parents who would drop their kids off at school. They want to come in and do a 5-hour shift and then go home, and then you'll have the 18-year-old university student who's absolutely digitally native and obsessed with technology, whereas the stay-at-home parent maybe not so much. You've got to think about all of those people when you're rolling out stuff, right? Because they're all going to have to use it. How do you think about ensuring that an organization has thought about usability and adoption rates of the diverse store teams?
Yeah, so to me, this goes back to the flexibility, no? So because I don't think there's a one-fits-all solution, Andrew. That's the problem. Oftentimes, and there are some type of technology that, of course, you cannot customize and personalize. But as you said, you would approach the associates almost in a way in the same way you would approach customers. And to customers, no one would think right now of providing the same technology or the same experience to Gen Z or to the boomers. We know different demographics interact in different ways. Similarly, as you said, to me, I saw, and we experienced several times, the way that associates that are from an older demographic bracket scan, because they're used to scan with legacy device, is not the same as digital native. So it's actually almost word to word what you said applied to the smart data capture, and it really applies to everyone. And there is, to me, a need to provide a personalized experience. So for instance, for us, when we were working with some retailers, the fact that you can use a button to trigger the scan feels familiar, and that may be enough sometime. The fact instead that you can just continuously scan or have AR overlays to tell you what the reality would infer you to do, then this is perfect for more digital natives, and it's the easiest way to interact. I always have a phone in my hand. I would never think about using it this way. I would always hold whatever device, a smart device I have, as I would use my smartphone. So, and for us, even the fact that, when I do user testing, my thumb doesn't arrive in the same spot to land the scanning than maybe yours. So to be just able to move the scanning button on the screen, it creates a much more ergonomic solution. And so that's what I meant before with all the best practices that we collect around the world. The camera preview is something that it makes a huge impact. And they may seem like smaller details, and they make then on the user a very big difference. And in these regards, one thing that sounds really silly, but again, unlocks a lot of value is using red and green as an immediate feedback of something you're doing is correct, something you're doing is not correct, and maybe highlight what is not correct. So all those aspects that come into that experience and personalize it just enough to make it feasible and flexible. And it still looks like I'm in control of the technology I use, because ultimately I'm hearing these times and times again when we do user testing. If you force a technology as is on all your associates, of course they will not like it. No one likes inherently to change. If I do something for an X amount of time and I am used to that process, and now you come in and say, oh, Jessica, please do it completely different and enjoy the process of struggling with the learning curve. Well, I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to enjoy it. And if I can give it my specific tweak, a little bit of my style, then that makes a big difference.
I love that. I mean, and the simple things like the red and green system that is just natural to human understanding. It's just a gentle nudge, but can make such a difference. In a past life, I was a pilot, and I remember one of the coolest lessons that I learned at university was about human factors and how cockpits have changed ever so slightly to enable, safer flying. And from little things like the captain's seat is higher to create a natural authoritative gradient, to the fact that the landing gear lever looks like a wheel and the flap lever looks like a flap because people had accidents because they were lowering flaps and not landing gear. And like just little gentle nudges like that, I think are just super smart and just fascinating to think through. And had to have come from someone asking the right questions, right? Especially after, post an accident or something similar. So, well, what could we have done? What gentle nudge could we have applied? Or complaining.
Someone complaining about the right thing. And so is there anything that you've seen else in the retail space triggering propensity to change and change management?
Like, I think, but there's lots, right? Because I think what we've learned is that we have to constantly adapt and be agile. Like being fit is should be the number one goal of every retailer. How do I create a culture that change can happen really, really fast, that I can respond to a change in an economic context, a geopolitical context? All of those things are happening left, right, and center at the moment. I don't know if you've noticed the world's a bit chaotic. So it's like, as a retailer, that your number one skill really needs to be is not to do a certain thing, but to be able to do a lot of things quick. So for me, if I'm in my top right box of my risk register would be my speed of change. Like how quickly can I change and adapt to the world around us, and to the conversation we've been having. At the center of that world is humans, which means that it's even more important that we can do it quickly and cleverly and in a way that is designed for those humans. I'm going to wrap us up with one final question for you, and it's the unfair one that I ask everybody, which is pull out that crystal ball. If you think about the future store, the future state of customer experience, and all of the myriad of things that a retailer could do. There is a seemingly endless list of technologies I can deploy. How do I think about designing for that future store and the people who are in it? How do I stay focused to that? What's your advice?
My advice would be to really think about how the associates will access the most relevant knowledge that they need. I think knowledge is the key word here. There are so many data points, as you were saying, there's so much noise from data. And we often are challenged by the fact that we need a specific information as soon as we can to be able to take a decision. So to me, it's like, how do you get the right knowledge at the right time to your associates? That's where I think that the key is going to be. Because if the information is the wrong one, then there's no point. If it comes too late, there's also no point. So it's to me it's about knowledge and the right timing. So
what a perfect note to end on. Unlocking the foundations before you try and do all the other fancy stuff. Let's just get the knowledge right, the data right. Jessica, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for teaching me a heap about, well, pretty much everything from turkeys to night clubbing, somehow thrown in here in a conversation about human-centric design in retail. But I loved it. What a brilliant conversation. Thank you too to our audience. I appreciate you and your engagement right through. I encourage you to stay around with us, chat in the chat and continue the conversation. There's also a bunch of resources about Scandit and all of the things that Jessica just spoke about, and we can all learn from. So please hang around with us and enjoy those and go through those. Jessica, thank you so much. It was
thank you,
an
Andrew,
absolute
for
pleasure.
Having me. Yeah, likewise. It was really a blast. Thank you so much.
No problems. And thank you to Rethink Retail, of course, for hosting us. And we'll see you all at the next Rethink event.